tomorrow. I think when we wind up Sunday by having worship and kind of have fellowship and get to be with each other, that it kind of sets good tone for the weekday. It makes us to where we kind of start the day on Monday and everything seems to go pretty good for a couple hours. And then it seems like there's always something or somebody or something that just kind of messes things up sometimes. So let's just try to be as loving and kind to people as we possibly can, and try to love one another as Jesus asked us to. We're getting into chapter 8. Now, chapter 8 is a little difficult. Chapter 8, while it is a vision that Daniel is having, it's a whole different series of events, but it is still processing on some of the same events that we've already discussed. We'll only be able to probably tonight get into the introduction part of it to get you ready to where we can really try to put it together. Some things in the scriptures are like a puzzle. You read quite a lot of scriptures and you're still kind of trying to figure it out, and then by the time you get through the last fourth of the chapter, it starts to wrap it up together and make it where it has a lot of sense. So we're going to be looking at the book of Daniel here in chapter 8, where we're going to be looking at the vision of a ram and the vision of a goat. And so if you're in Daniel 8, we're going to be looking at chapter 8. Don't know how many verses we'll get into, but we get into a few of them. There's an important change of focus that comes about in this particular vision of Daniel and the language that is put before us. In fact, Daniel 1 and verse 1 all the way through Daniel 2 and verse 3, if you remember, was written in Hebrew. But the language of the Jewish captives who had been carried over into Babylon captivity. Then when we got to Daniel 2, and I believe verse 4, all the way through to the end of Daniel 7 that we got through last week, it's written in Aramaic. Now, you may be saying, well, why is it written in Hebrew? And then we get to these other chapters and it's written in Aramaic. It's because it was written in Hebrew while they were still in Jerusalem, but then when they were taken into captivity, they were in Babylonian territory, and everything that was written in their language of the Babylonians of that day, which happened to be Aramaic. This tells us that the messages of chapter 2 all the way through 7 that we talked about, that it is to be heard not only by the people of Israel, but it's also to be heard by all those that represent Gentile nations. And you and I belong basically to not just only America's not just a Gentile nation, it is also has a lot of Jews that live in America. There are a lot, apparently Muslims in the north part that have moved in. There's a lot of Islam. There's a lot of people that are from Japan. There's a lot of people from India. So America is not completely a Gentile nation, though it is predominantly a Gentile nation. Now, as we get through chapter 8 and we get to the end of the book of Revelation, when we get to chapter 12, Daniel returns to writing in the Hebrew language again. Because you remember, they're allowed to, basically going to be allowed to go back from captivity, Babylon captivity, and go back to Jerusalem. So you have the writing in the Hebrew language here, starting in chapter 8, and indicates that the focus now, the general focus, starting in chapter 8 of these final chapters, is going to be on Israel. And God's going to reveal to the captive Jewish people what their future is going to look like. Now, many of them are going to be D-E-A-D, dead. Because a lot of this is going to take place way on down the future after those people are gone, but it's still will affect the Israel nation and still will affect those that are Jewish. So as we go on to our scripture text, I'd like for you to notice, number one, the circumstances of Daniel's vision. So let's look at verses 1 and verse 2. In the third year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared to me Daniel, after the one that appeared to me the first time. I saw in the vision, and it so happened while I was looking, that I was in Shushan, the citadel, which is the province of Elam. And I saw in the vision that I was by the river Lulah. Now, in the opening of the verses here that you're looking at in Daniel tells us basically two things in regard to the vision. The first thing on the screen says that Daniel tells us when he received the vision. And Daniel introduces this second vision that you're looking at in the same way that he introduced the first vision that we learned about in Daniel 7. You remember Daniel's first vision, we talked about the one of the four beasts, and notice that it occurred in chapter 7, it says it occurred in the first year of Belshazzar's reign as king of Babylon in 553 BC. Now the second vision that we're looking at that's occurring here in Daniel 8 occurred 2 years later. It says that it is in the third year of Belshazzar's reign, which would be 551 BC. So it tells us when the vision was received. Second thing that I want us to know is that Daniel tells us where he received the vision, and we see this in verse 2. Now, it is still important for us as we look at this particular vision to understand that Daniel was still in Babylon when he received the vision. He's not in his homeland yet. He's still in Babylon. But in the vision itself, Daniel sees himself in a certain place. And in that certain place, it's called Shushan. Now, Shushan, I've got you a map here that I put together for you. I don't know if you can see it very well. You probably won't be able to. I tried to make some yellow up there. Is that yellow showing up? I want you to be able to see that Shushan, if you can see where it's located. It's also known, and this is a very interesting word, is known as Susa. If you've done any studies in history concerning Alexander the Great, he had a lot to do with going through that country and also dealing with a place called Susa. It's located about 250 miles east of Babylon. I tried to show you where the ruins of Babylon are. And it's 120 miles north of the Persian Gulf. Now, does anybody not know from America and from our dealings with Iran and Iraq and all those areas where the Persian Gulf is? I think you can kind of picture where the general area is that I'm talking about here. It's also very interesting that at the time Daniel has this particular vision, the place on the screen called Shushan, it basically is nothing. It's basically nothing. But remember now, Daniel is basically seeing in the future. And so in time, though, Shushan, that you see there, would become the capital city of the Mede and Persian Empire. And you also noticed in Daniel that we read that it says in his vision that he was by what river? The Lulah River. And I'm showing you where that river is also in connection to Shushan and also to Babylon, so that you can see kind of the area that we're talking about too. This is also interesting because in Daniel's time, Eulalia was nothing more than a 900 wide foot canal. That's all it was. But now Daniel is looking into the future, as we've been trying to talk about here, but it will soon, down in the future, it will become a mighty river upon which one day Alexander the Great and his troops are going to sail on. the vision that we're looking at here, if we can kind of put this together, is going to give us a look at Daniel and his vision, and we're also going to be looking at the vision of the four beasts. And not only the four beasts, but this vision of Daniel sees himself 250 miles away from where he was physically when he received this vision. So now as we move on to verses 3 through 14, I want us to see the content of Daniel's second vision, and that is first of all in what Daniel sees in verses 3 through 5. And the first thing we're going to see is Daniel is going to see the animals. So let's read verses 3 through 5. Then I lifted my eyes and saw, and there, standing beside the river, was a ram, which had two horns. And the two horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last. I saw the ram pushing westward and northward and southward, so that no animal could withstand him, nor was there any that could deliver from his hand. But he did according to his will, and became great. And as I was considering, suddenly a male goat came from the west, across the surface of the whole earth, without touching the ground, and the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. Now I'm sure if you basically have learned anything about when you have looked at animals, that you know that in the scriptures that an animal, it isn't referring basically to a literal animal. That basically an animal represents a particular nation, we've learned about that, or a kingdom. So here we have the ram with two horns. You have one higher than the other, and it represents the Mede and the Persian Empire. And this is the third way that we have seen the Mede and the Persian Empire since we began looking at Daniel, at the book of Daniel, picturing the book of Daniel. Now, do you remember in Nebuchadnezzar's dream? In Nebuchadnezzar's dream, and what I've tried to do here is I've tried to break down these chapters for you so you can see where I'm going as I'm looking at this. Daniel 2, showing on the screen, the Mede-Persian Empire was represented by the chest and arms of silver of a great image. And Daniel's vision of the beast in Daniel 4, if you look over at Daniel 4 column, the Mede-Persian Empire was symbolized by the bear. Remember that bear, it was raised up on one side, and remember it had 3 ribs in its mouth. Now by the time we get to Daniel 8, the Mede-Persian Empire is symbolized by a ram. Of course, the higher horn of the two, it basically symbolizes the Persians were just basically more powerful than the Medes were. And then I want you to notice this picture, because this is important of one of the verses that we read here. The ram pushes westward, and it says it pushes northward, and it says it pushes southward, but which direction did it not push? It did not go eastward. It went those other directions, but it did not go eastward. The lines up with this historical account is the direction the Medes and Persian Empire grew, and this is in history. And what she did, the Mede-Persian Empire, she pushed westward, and she conquered all these particular places. She conquered Babylon, Mesopotamia. She conquered Syria. She conquered Asia Minor. Then she pushed northward and conquered such nations as Armenia, and then Liberia, and then I believe also the nations bordering the Caspian Sea. And then she pushed southward and conquered such lands as Israel and Ethiopia. Think about Ethiopia, and Egypt and Libya, but she conquered no lands to her east whatsoever. Now, just as Daniel is contemplating the ram, well, this vision, another animal appears in his vision. And this next animal that appears is the goat. And the goat represents the Greek Empire. Now, I'm sure some of this you already know, but I'm just going over it because I want to make sure that you're aware of this. This is the third different symbol in the scriptures here that we have seen for the Greek Empire in the book of Daniel. Now, if you remember here, and let me give you another guide here, that in the book of Daniel, remember Nebuchadnezzar dream in Daniel 2, we remember that you see the Greek Empire symbolized also belly and thighs of bronze. We talked about that. And then Daniel's vision in chapter 7, the Greek Empire was symbolized by the leopard, remember, of 4 heads and 4 wings on his back. Then when we get to Daniel 8, the Greek Empire is symbolized by the goat. Now, most of y'all in here know a few things about goats, don't you? I know that Robert knows a lot about goats. He goes to football games where those goats play. So I know most of you know about those goats, and I've got somebody in here that works for the goats. Yeah, all right. So the Greeks were known throughout ancient history. If you know anything about the goats, they were known as the goat people. That's how they were described. They were described as the goat people. That's not particularly flattering for someone to say that you're goat people, but that's how they were basically characterized as. In fact, if you look at any of the ancient coins, many of the coins of ancient Greece, they have on them, if you've seen a coin from Greece, it basically bears the symbol of the goat on it. Has it on there. And then bronze figure goats were placed in and around in history of Greek government buildings and palaces. You can go over there now and go over to Greece and you can see these particular government buildings and places, and they still have boring images on there of goat. Now I want you to pay close attention now to two details regarding the goat in the latter part of verse 5. Notice verse 5 with this slide. 1, that the goat came from the west across the whole earth without touching the ground. And 2, that it had a very noticeable horn between its eyes. And we'll tell you more about this particular situation here in a little bit. So in his vision now, according to the scriptures here, Daniel sees a ram with one horn that's higher than the other. And remember now, what does this symbolize? This symbolizes the Mede-Persian Empire. And then he sees a goat with a notable horn right between its eyes. Think about that, right between its eyes, and that symbolizes the Greek Empire. So let's move on now to verses 6 and 7. And here we have Daniel sees the attack that's going to be coming in Daniel 6 and 7. Then he came to the ram that had 2 horns, which I had seen standing beside the river, and ran at him with furious power. And I saw him confronting the ram. He was moved with rage against him, attacked the ram, and broke his 2 horns. There was no power in the ram to withstand him, but he cast him down to the ground and trampled him, and there was no one that could deliver the ram from his hand. Now, have you seen those nature shows on TV where you have these 2 animals that viciously they butt heads with each other? You know, when I've seen that almost gives me a headache, Ralph. I just almost get a headache just watching that. But notice, in Daniel's vision, the goat attacks the ram. Greece attacks Medo-Persia. That's what's going on here. And the fact that the goat came from the west clear across the earth without touching the ground tells us the goat, the Greek army, was overwhelmed by a more powerful than the ram, the Mede-Persian army, and won a decisive victory. So we're going to have somebody that is more powerful than what you see here. And there's going to be one particular nation that's going to come out of this more powerful than the other three. Now I want you to notice that the notable horn between the goat's eyes, that notable horn was Alexander the Great. He's the commander of the Greek army and the first king or king of the Greek Empire. And I believe we talk about that in verse 21. If you go to verse 21, it says, the shaggy goat is the king of Greece, and the large horn between its eyes is the first king. So have no doubt that that's Alexander the Great. As a side note, I want to say also about the Mede-Persians before we move on here, something that I have here. The most important thing the Mede-Persians did from a prophetic standpoint is that they basically allowed the Jewish people who had been taken into Babylonian captivity to return to their native land of Israel. I don't know if you know that, but they allowed that to happen. Only about 102,000 Jews chose to go home, while the rest of them, you know what happened to the rest of them? They were dispersed throughout the other nations of the world. Dispersed all the way through the other nations of the world. So in the vision, Daniel sees the animals. And the animals, the ram, and he sees the goat here. Then he sees the attack. And so you have a goat attacking and defeating the ram. And then thirdly, and I'll try to wrap this up, we're not going to get through with everything tonight. Daniel sees the abomination. So if you would, let's set the stage for next time. Let's read verses 9 through, I believe, through 14. Therefore the male goat grew very great. But when he became strong, the large horn was broken, and in place of it, 4 notable ones came up toward the 4 winds of heaven. And out of one of them came a little horn, which grew exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, toward the glorious land. And it grew up to the host of heaven, and it cast down some of the host and some of the stars to the ground, and trampled them. He even exalted himself as high as the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifices were taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. Because of transgression, an army was given over to the horn to oppose the daily sacrifices, and he cast truth down to the ground. He did all this and prospered. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to that certain one who was speaking, how long will the vision be concerning the daily sacrifices and the transgression of desolation, the giving of both the sanctuary and the host to be trampled afoot? And he said to me, for 2,300 days, then the sanctuary will be cleansed. Now let me draw your attention real quickly to the first part of verse 8. Therefore the male goat grew very great, but when he became strong, the large horn was broken. When we keep in mind about everything that Daniel has seen, basically in his vision, Daniel would already be dead before all these prophetic events are going to take place. And in this vision, notice what Daniel sees. He sees the defeating of the Mede-Persians, and then the Greeks rise up, and they go on to conquer many other nations, and they grow stronger, and they grow stronger, and what do they eventually do? They eventually become the 3rd Gentile empire. And then Babylon's the first empire. Mede-Persians, the second empire. And the Greek empire would be the next great empire. But in this vision, Daniel sees the large horn was broken. Now remember, Remember who we said was the large horn? Remember we talked about Alexander the Great? Here we're seeing the death of Alexander the Great. And we learned earlier from what we talked about Alexander the Great that he died in the prime of his life at an age of 33 years old. 33 years old. Do you know his death is still a mystery? It's still a mystery, and history tells us that upon his death that he was very ill. And that, well, if I get into this, I'll be telling you my next point I want to tell you about these generals. So I'm going to stop right here lest I tell you what I'm speaking to tell you, because I know what my notes and all are here. But next week, I'm going to tell you about these generals and how they came into being. And these generals are important. They are important because they take, from Alexander, they take these four generals, take certain parts of the countries, and they develop them into what we now know those countries are. And it's interesting how that in history those countries develop and how they still are today. We'll talk about that next week. Interesting to this point. To get more interested next week. You hear this morning that you're not a member of the Lord's church, that means one thing. That means that you're not a Christian. In order to do that, you know that we always tell people that we must be baptized into Christ so that we can receive the remission of sins and be able to be